Hey everybody, it's Josiah Friedman, CEO and founder of Voices for the Voiceless, with you on Facebook Live. Thank you for taking a minute out of your day in this crazy time to join us. I'm really excited to be with you today because we've got somebody with us who's really been instrumental in working with us at Voices for the Voiceless and helping us to be prepared to go into spaces, really to create vulnerable spaces where people who are facing isolation and alone can come in and really be embraced and empowered by community. Doing that in our really political environment, and especially around the issues of abortion and unplanned pregnancy, can be like walking on eggshells sometimes. It can be really difficult, but in this time, I think it's never been more important. But before I introduce Andy, I want to sort of introduce what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about mental health and isolation, and here's why. So many of you, if you're part of our movement, you're part of the Stand By Her movement, you're somebody who has really been instrumental in helping the people in your community in situations that are unplanned pregnancy and in other isolating spaces in your community. And during this time, the need for that work is more than it has ever been before, maybe in our lifetimes. So many people are isolated, so many people are alone, and we are also isolated and alone. And because of that, we have to be incredibly emotionally and spiritually and mentally healthy so that we can be ready to go into those places and to fill the need. So we're going to have a conversation about that today. If you have any questions you'd like us to go over, this is an AMA and Ask Me Anything. So feel free to shoot those questions for me or especially for our guest into Facebook Live, and we'll get to them during the conversation. But now I want to introduce our guest. Andy Maurer is a licensed therapist and board member at Voices for the Voiceless. He's a keynote speaker who works mostly with high performance leaders, helping them to deal with toxic stress and to really be cared for so that they can be really good leaders. I feel like Andy is an incredible mentor of mine and is responsible for so much. Andy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. I wish I could literally be with you and not just from a distance. We'll start off by saying that, but I'm happy to be online with
Absolutely. Yeah, well, same here. Looking forward to when we can be in person again.
you. Yeah.
My goodness. I want to start with this question because I think this is kind of a good way to start our conversation. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. It's a confusing time. How do we tell what we're feeling in this time as people? I feel like there's so much that's going on inside of us. What do you have any guesses as to what that is, and how do
Oof.
we tell?
Well, at this point, most of us probably are not in tune with what we feel because honestly, we're probably in a state of numbness. When everything was happening, we move into this sense of shock, which is a form of numbness. And then all these emotions, such as fear and anger and discouragement, and anxiety, depression, start to come out. But after you go through that for so long, after you have 3, 4 weeks of that, you start to revert back to a sense of numbness, a kind of shutdown, because we really can't handle elevated levels of emotion like that for a long period of time. So we have to cope by kind of pushing everything down. I think the first thing to do to really tune into what we're feeling is to create space where we start to listen to our body. And the reason why I say that is because when most people think about emotion, if I was to ask you, for instance, Josiah, what are you feeling right now? You might say excitement. And then I might ask you, okay, so how do you know you actually feel excited? And usually in that question, people get confused and they're like, what do you mean I know that I'm feeling excited? I just do. It's a cognitive thought. I feel excited. But when we look at the research, actually, what it shows is that emotion is not a cognitive process. It's actually a somatic, a bodily experience. So if I'm feeling excited, my heart rate will be elevated. I might feel butterflies in my stomach. I might feel a rush of energy and blood flow throughout my arms and my face. So we really need to tune into what's our body telling us, and that's going to help give us an indication of maybe what we feel. So creating space to slow down and simply ask yourself, what do I notice in my body right now? What do I notice about my heart rate? Is my energy high or low? Is it comfortable or uncomfortable? Does it feel flat or elevated? Questions like that. And that'll help us start to describe and define what we feel.
Hmm. So it's almost like you need to take a moment and take a pause and evaluate physically what's going on inside yourself.
Yeah. And what's so difficult about that, okay, I knew you were going to ask me another question there, but I have to say this. What's so difficult about slowing down and noticing what's happening in our body is because when we're under high levels of stress, we actually begin to disconnect from our body. Because who wants to feel all the anxiety and the fear? So we begin to avoid our body and shut everything down. So that's what actually makes this process difficult is natural tendency is to shut down our emotions and shut down our physical sensations. And we actually need to create space to attune to those.
Hmm. I have a question for you because I think for a lot of people, including myself, this is pretty new language. So, as we mentioned, it's really important that, especially because there's so many needs in our community right now, and there's such an opportunity to sort of shine the light. It's almost that it's never been more important um, that we are emotionally and spiritually healthy ourselves so that we can be there for people in this moment. But
Yeah.
stopping and realizing what's going on inside yourself, that's a new thing for most people, I think. Is there I don't know exactly how to ask this question, but is there some sort of even basic exercise that people can use to sort of start that process if they're brand new to the idea of taking a moment and trying to sort of uh, trying to take account of themselves and what's going on inside?
Yeah, well, let me start by just really normalizing the reality that most of us never learned how to attune to our emotions and our feelings. We didn't usually grow up in homes where our parents were asking us questions like, what are you feeling today? They weren't attuned to whether we were sad or we were afraid or we were angry. Typically, they would just tell us to shut it down. And when we have learned that in childhood, it's really difficult to learn in adulthood what we feel. We don't have those skills. A really helpful tool that I use is actually a program or it's a sheet called the Mood Meter. And it was developed by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And what they did is they have four quadrants broken up, and they have different words of emotions in those different quadrants. So at first question that I asked you is your energy in your body high or is your energy low? Okay, so that places you on a top quadrant or a bottom quadrant. And then from right to left, it asks you the question, is that emotion pleasurable or not pleasurable? So then you can move to right to left. So you're going to end up in one of these quadrants based on whether it's high energy, low energy, pleasant or unpleasant. And then they give you about 20 words in that quadrant that you can pick from and choose based on the intensity of what you might be feeling. Download the mood meter. You can get it on Google. It's a sheet. They actually have an app that you can download, and it's just a great tool to get words in front of us to start to name what we feel. That's one thing. The second thing is, like I said, is to slow down and start asking yourself, what is my body experiencing? Do I feel flat or full? Do I feel tense or do I feel light? Do I feel heavy or do I feel calm? Asking sensory questions like that can help us tune into what we feel.
Hmm. Okay, the mood meter.
It's very helpful.
Okay. I encourage you, if this is language that's a little bit new to you, and maybe unfamiliar, I'm in the same boat as you are. And I want to just say, from our movement, what we've realized is that as there's been an uptick in people, so at Voices for the Voiceless, we're working mostly with people who are facing unplanned pregnancy or who are single moms, just trying to make things work when childcare has been taken away, when the schools are shut down. Um, in those moments when people are really feeling it, it's so important that we're there for them. But to do that, we have to be so aware of what's going on with them to be able to do that. And we need to be prepared for that. And that's really what this is about. Andy, I want to ask you this question. From a mental health perspective, how do you think situations like this, I don't know that we've ever had one truly like this, but how do you think a situation of increased isolation and desperation um, would affect our communities and the people around us?
Mm. Well, not well, and we're experiencing that right now. Isolation is one thing, but when you add all of these other factors, such as fear of illness, you add high levels of stress, you add people in the home together who naturally shouldn't spend that much time together, especially if there's domestic violence or abuse or other things going on. If a marriage was already going really well, it's probably maybe even going better. But if a marriage was really struggling or a family was struggling with abuse or domestic violence or other things, it's not getting better. Okay, it's probably getting worse because the stress has intensified. So, as far as it relates to isolation, you have all of these different bubbles around it, such as financial stress, family stress, homeschooling children now, maybe not sleeping as well, not eating as well, not getting exercise. And all of those factors around isolation, it just balloons the feeling of depression and fear and loneliness. And what's so interesting is we have this 6 foot rule of how close you can be to someone. And naturally, neurologically, in relationship, we only need about 1 to 2 feet of space in order to feel safe and connected. Okay, so most people don't want to be face to face. They have a little bit of their bubble, and their bubble's usually 1 to 2 feet. Okay, now we just intensified that by a number of 6 or a number of 3. We're really asking people to stay connected, and it's kind of sad because we're telling people stay connected. You still have Zoom. You can still talk to people online. And that's like for me going from a steak dinner at a really fancy restaurant to eating waffles with peanut butter. It's not enjoyable, it's not nutritious, it's not satisfying. Maybe some people like waffles with peanut butter. I don't really like waffles with peanut butter. And there's a lot of grief associated with that. There's a lot of loneliness associated with that. And I think it's going to really, on a projected kind of moving forward, it's really going to cripple our understanding of what it means to even connect. Because when we do come back together, whenever that will be, we will be afraid to connect. I think there will be one group of people who will be terrified to connect and not know how to connect after being isolated for so long. And there will be another group of people who literally shed tears. They will break down with the reality that they actually get to hug or they get to touch or they get to be face to face with other people because of how much they needed that. So we're going to have kind of these spectrums when we come back to it. But it's disrupting us on all different kinds of levels.
We are going to be, and I think you said it, starved for real human connection in
Yeah.
major ways. One question that popped in the chat, I want to ask it to you, but I guess after we realize this is going to be this is kind of a season of sorrow and lament, of sitting with people in their pain at least 6 feet away, of being in a space where we are just realizing that right now the world as we know it is really preventing a lot of that connection from taking place that really needs to take place. So, with that said, this is a great question. And by that, I mean, I don't know that there's an answer to it, but I'm going to throw it to you anyway. We had somebody ask, are there any sort of long-term ways to connect with people and invest in relationship that you see that are maybe beyond what we have in like Zoom call, right? I think we all know about Zoom. Anything that you're seeing that it's not a perfect substitute, but that you recommend as a way to connect or as a pattern of connection for the people in our lives that we really care about. And when we want to invest in relationship in a long-term way, not just until this ends, because we don't know how long it's going to be.
It's so hard because you can't physically be in location with someone unless you're basically in your car, kind of sitting next to one another. in two different cars. I think what is most helpful from what we do have. So what we do have is we have virtual communication. Um, I personally do get out of my house and I take walks. I go on hikes. And when I see people, I try to make eye contact with them and I try to say hi to them. That's really important for me, that I'm still getting to connect with someone and say hi. But for people who like best friends or relatives or family members, I think what's most helpful is to have a consistent time every single week that you meet with people virtually. And the reason why I say consistent time is because in relationship and intimacy, we need safety, we need availability, and we need consistency. Safety, availability, and consistency. And when we're meeting with people random times throughout the day and texting and sending Marco Polos, it actually doesn't provide our nervous system with a sense of consistency and safety and availability, knowing that this person will be there. They've committed to this time. So I have a group of guys I meet with. I have two groups of guys that I meet with every week at the same time. And that's my opportunity to know, okay, I can carry a lot inside, but on Tuesday night and Friday morning, I'm going to have an opportunity to express what's going on inside. It's almost like it relieves our anxiety around this survival mode, is that I have a space and a time to open up and to share what's actually going on. So consistency, availability, and creating those sacred moments that are consistent.
So creating a pattern of spaces and times where
Mm-hmm.
we can connect with people that really matter in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's great. I want to ask you. I think that for all of us, we're dealing with isolation, and things have been harder and more difficult for everyone. Um, at Voices, we're really passionate about making sure that no one walks through unplanned pregnancy alone. This isolating experience around which there's a lot of stigma in our world that's been very politicized. And even in a world where people are not desperate and isolated, they will feel desperate and isolated. And it makes complete sense. I want to ask you this. For people, they may be facing unplanned pregnancy. They may be facing something else, some sort of isolating experience that's just sort of naturally isolating or difficult. I want to know, um, how do you think this situation will affect them? Will it compound the effect? Will it make it more difficult? And then based on that, how can we stand in the gap and do something to connect with them at really important moments?
Well, I think what you're asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is those people who are struggling or isolated, what's this going to be like for them since they're already there? And then how do we show up for them? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to get easier. We do know that the purchasing of alcohol has increased exponentially. We do know that domestic violence rates have increased exponentially. We do know from stats and data from the 2008 recession around difficult financial times, suicide escalates exponentially. And that's partly due to financial. So whenever you have a financial stress, a lot of these mental health issues are escalating. That's why it's so important for us to make sure that we create business for people and income for people, because when money's not there, it's not just like people lose their jobs. When money's not there, a lot of other things suffer for them. So if they do have a small business, or if they do have a stream of income, try to support them as best as you can. If they're selling candles, if they're selling masks, if they're teaching a course online, try to fund them financially, because actually it's very difficult to care for someone's emotional well-being when they're just swimming in financial stress. Okay, so that's really difficult. So show up for them in a financial way, not just an emotional way. And check in on those people, the single mothers, the people who have unplanned pregnancies, single people in general who are not living with their family or friends, people who feel more isolated, checking up on them, writing them a letter. You can write them a letter, write them a note, you can send them flowers, all of these different things to let them know that we are here for them. But it will be more difficult for them. Now, what's funny is I have heard it is different for people. There are people who are more introverted, and studies have asked those people, how's this time affecting you? And typically they have a job. Um, the ones who are okay have a job, and they say, it's kind of like normal life for me. I don't really see people anyway. I'm kind of a, stay at home. I play video games, or I watch shows, or I read books, and I don't go out a lot. But but if they have a job, that's okay. But lots of people who are more introverted don't have jobs, and we need to really stand in the gap by financially standing in the gap, emotionally standing in the gap, and asking this question: how can I be in this with you? That's a really important question, instead of how can I help you? Because helping you is like, I'm going to deposit something and throw something your way, and then I'm going to get out of here. How can I be in this with you is saying, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. How can I walk with you in this moment? How can I be in this with you versus how can I help you?
What a paradigm shifting question.
Mm-hmm.
It, kind of an uncomfortable question, because I think it's not expected that you'll be in, it's not, most people don't expect that you want to sit in that space with them. I'm thinking about that question. I want to ask you a follow up to it, and that's this. Um, Obviously, this situation has led to a large uptick in traumatic experiences for people, whether it's domestic abuse, or whether it's unplanned pregnancy, etc. The list goes on, and it's long. I've been so influenced and encouraged by how you have helped people understand what is trauma and how does it really affect the way we live our lives, the way we think about life, etc. So I want to throw out there, could you explain what is trauma, and how does it affect the way we make decisions? So especially to help us understand for the people in our lives who are facing it right now, how is it going to affect the way that they make decisions and communicate or don't communicate with us?
Okay, so let me define what trauma is more broadly. Trauma is when an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances happens to us, and we experience it or we perceive it as being emotionally or physically harmful, and it overwhelms us and it impacts us long-term emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, occupationally, relationally. Okay, so it's an event that happens, we experience it as overwhelming, and it has lasting impacts. Now, a form of trauma is this concept called toxic stress. Now, toxic stress is prolonged and elevated levels of stress in the absence of deep connection. Oh, man, with that definition, every single person is going through that. Prolonged and elevated levels of stress in the absence of deep connection. And when stress is actually a good thing. It actually allows me to do this podcast today because I have cortisol running through my body, getting my mind amped up and moving when I exercise. But when stress becomes prolonged and elevated over a long period of time, cortisol builds up and it doesn't have a place to drop down. And it impacts us neurologically, it impacts us somatically, it impacts us relationally. I believe that this time right now, in a way that we've never seen it before, is putting the entire world, which is crazy to think about, putting the entire world into a collective grief and a collective social trauma. And I think we won't know the ramifications of that until 5, 10, 20 years down the road. But anytime trauma has hit societies, whether it's through war or poverty or slavery or different things, it has shifted trajectories of the way people's minds work, the way they connect, the way they do life, because it takes us down into our survival brain, which is about fight, flight, freeze, or submit. Okay, so we typically forget the submit one. We see this a lot with sexual abuse survivors, is maybe they didn't fight, maybe they didn't flee, maybe they didn't freeze, but they submitted, they participated in the activity, and they feel a lot of shame. But actually it's out of survival because they couldn't fight, they couldn't flee, they couldn't freeze. So they had to submit, they had to almost show that they were active in that process so that they didn't get hurt or so that they didn't feel more shame. And we typically miss the submit one, and we put judgments on people who have sexual experiences that maybe they didn't want, but they did have. They went through with it. But it's not out of a place of uh, choice, it's out of a place of survival. And I think this collective grief and trauma, it's taken us down into our low regions of the brain around survival, and it's taken us out of our logical brain and out of our creative brain and out of our rational brain that's able to plan ahead and have rational decision making.
Wow. Because this is so widespread, I think it's amazing what you said about this it's going to be hard to know exactly the breadth of this traumatic experience that we all are kind of in for with this. Um, One of the questions that I've loved hearing you talk about has been, or rather, answer has been this: when somebody's stuck in survival mode, as so many people are, as people who are facing unplanned pregnancy right now, and any other traumatic experience. You already mentioned the question, how can I kind of sit with you in this, right? How can I be there for you in this? So besides asking that question, which I think is part of the answer to this, how do we most effectively walk with someone who is going through that right now in a way that could help them maybe get out of survival mode, that being the main goal in this situation? What are some ways that we can think about doing that for the people in our lives?
Mm-hmm. So if you sense that someone that you know or is close to you, one symptom of survival mode is that people will go and they will start processing difficult moments and they won't stop talking. Like they'll just be rambling 10 different topics. They're all over the place. And the most important thing in that moment, it's not really helpful to just keep listening. Okay, because they're lost, they're in survival mode, they're spinning out of control, but they don't know what to do. So they keep talking, they keep going on random tangents. The best thing that you can do is to take a breath, notice what's happening, notice in your body all the anxiety and all the stress, and just pause them and say, whoa, can we just slow it down for a second? That all sounds really heavy and really hard. I just want to slow it down for a second. Wow. I'm so sorry that that's happening. Notice my tone of voice is getting calm, it's getting soft. I'm slowing the energy down because if neurologically our energy is amped up, which it typically is through trauma, we call it hyper arousal. You don't want to help elevate the intensity, you want to help bring it down. So we have this thing called these mirror neurons, which means if I took a breath right now, 90% of the time, you're going to take a breath simply by watching me take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Okay. Or when I smile, you're going to smile. So we can reflectively give to people what we are wanting them to experience in their body. I might shift and straighten my spine and put my feet flat on the ground and take a deep breath. Now, more than likely, if someone's in tune across from me, they're going to do the same thing. And we know that when we put our feet flat on the ground and we straighten our spine and we take a breath, it calms the trauma. It allows us to access the rational brain. But here's the kicker. You yourself have to know that it's spiraling out of control, which means that you have to be attuned to your own trauma, your own energy levels. You have to be asking questions like, I'm really curious what's happening in my body right now as this person talks about their pain, about their stress. Am I getting amped up? Am I getting in my survival mode? Gotta take a breath, feet flat on the ground, and mirror those neurons, those mirror neurons, show them what it looks like to calm down. That's really, you can do that virtually, and that's one of the best things that you can do for someone who's really overwhelmed.
I think you just did it, but you mentioned you can do that virtually. Could you demonstrate what that looks like virtually?
Yeah, so it depends if you're like, if someone can see your full body and you're kind of like this, and someone's getting really overwhelmed, I would just go, and I would do my head like this, which is to show like, yeah, this is difficult. Okay. So they're going to be watching me. Their mirror neurons can't help but attune to what my body just did. Or I might be able to, one other thing that I really love to do is I'll actually close my eyes. So when I'm working with clients and leaders and they're talking, I'll close my eyes. I'll just go like this. And as soon as someone closes their eyes, the person sometimes stops talking because they're like, what are they doing over there? And I close my eyes because I want to get centered with what's happening in my body, but I also want to give them an opportunity to not have the pressure of me watching their every move, of me watching how they're responding. I just close my eyes and I just listen. And they don't have to stress about how they look or how they appear, or especially if they have a lot of shame, like with unplanned pregnancy or different things. Sometimes closing our eyes can be very shame reducing, and we can just be with people. You can just go, yeah, that's really difficult. I just want to sit with that and think about that. Can you give me 10 seconds? I just want to kind of reflect on what you just said there. Now, that's embarrassing for a lot of people because in our society, we're not used to silence, but it's actually those 5 to 10 seconds of silence that create the most transformation, the most empathy, the most regulation inside of our nervous system.
Wow. Deep
There's your breath.
breaths. Yeah,
Yep.
and practicing that. That's really informative. I think, guys, as you walk with people who are facing these situations every day, unplanned pregnancy, again, something else. It's sort of an isolating experience. I want to encourage you to do that. And there are things you can do, even if you can only meet virtually right now. There are ways that you can sit with that person. I just want to encourage you to do that, and to move forward. There's a question that was asked by Josh Beeman on the chat that I want to throw out there. One of the things he asked was, there's been a lot of talk about a potential baby boom. Everyone's at home,
Mm.
who knows what, things happen, there's a lot of questions about what that will entail. So in other
Mm.
words, at the very least, we're confident that the number of unplanned pregnancies is not going to go down. And there's going to be more situations rather than less. And there's going to be more isolation because in these circumstances, even if you would have normally gone to someone, unless they're your family members, which are not normally the first people you want to talk to about a situation like this, you might have to go elsewhere. And so a question was asked, what can we be doing sort of now and in the next 9 months to be standing by people in that situation? Andy, I'm going to toss the question to you if you have anything to add, but I'm going to take a minute and just say there's a number of things you can do that have been mentioned. We've blogged about a few of them that are really constructive and that we've already seen work and really empower some different people. So number one on the list really has to do with childcare. So a lot of people have lost their childcare because of the situation, especially a lot of working moms. So this doesn't apply to unplanned pregnancy per se. However, for a lot of single moms in desperate circumstances, this is what they're dealing with right now. We've realized that if you offer to babysit while while she's at home, so she can get some work done, or even help pay for childcare so that she can do that and continue to provide for her family and make her own way. That's a big thing. At Voices, we're helping connect certain moms who need childcare in this season, especially single moms, with it. So if you're somebody on this call who you have access to someone who would provide childcare either at your church or in your own circle, or you'd be willing to provide it, please let us know because we're helping people in that way right now. Or if you know of somebody or you need childcare taken care of, please reach out to us. That's one really empowering way. We've also seen people run errands on her behalf or donate essentials. That's been really important. We've seen certain employers adapting their policies so that they provide sick leave and backup childcare so that they can work that into your policies. If you're connected with an employer, you want to make sure that's happening at your company. Reach out to us and let us know, and we'll connect you on that. The last thing is this: being in regular communication with the people in your life is really important right now. So we've already talked about the importance of consistency, but making sure you're lifting people's spirits. We've heard from single moms right now that letter writing to them just to show them that they are seen and not forgotten, and that you would be with them if you could, and that you are for them, and if they need anything to ask, sending someone a letter, that's a big deal right now. We also know that, so in around Mother's Day, Voices is going to be releasing a Mother's Day card campaign. So you can buy these really sleekly, creatively designed Mother's Day cards and send them to the people in your life. I encourage you to do that. We'll have more information on that in about a week or two as that gets a little closer. Um, the last thing, though, I'd encourage you to do is just sit with people in this space, just like we're doing right now, just like Andy showed you how to do. That type of human connection is vitally important for everyone who's facing unplanned pregnancy right now. Andy, I wanted to throw it to you in case you had anything to add or to emphasize on that.
Those are such great, really practical things that you guys are doing. So thank you for that. There have been some articles that have came out that talked about that this is going to be a new baby boomer generation. I actually don't think that, but I do think that the rates of unplanned pregnancy will increase. So let me explain this. During the previous baby boomer generation, you had people coming back from war who were happy to be home,
Yeah.
and life was a lot less stressful after a traumatic event. Right now, when people are at home, there is not a sense of peace. We are at war, in figuratively, in so many different ways, with ourselves, with this virus, with the economy. When we are under high levels of stress, we do not want to procreate. That's built into us biologically. Now, what we have seen is the rates of pornography increase exponentially. Exponentially. Now, the reason why I say that is because when rates of pornography increase, we see that most people who view pornography escalates, and then there's risky behaviors associated with that. So you lead that into unplanned pregnancy and risky sexual behaviors that are not educated in a healthy way, but that actually have hypersexualized connotations associated with them, which is kind of a breeding ground research has shown for some of unplanned pregnancy. And so what will happen is you'll have less stable families having kids, and you'll have more people who don't have stable home environments, who don't have the awareness around some of these issues, who are going to be able to have unplanned pregnancies in some ways. And stable families absolutely can have unplanned pregnancies, but typically I think that we will see a decrease in overall fertility rates, but an increase in unplanned pregnancies, because people aren't really planning to have babies right now. That's built into us biologically. So I think that is some of the dynamics that might appear.
Wow. Hence, I think in many ways the importance to let people in your life know that you're there for them, even if you think that's something that they should already know. I think that that's a big thing. I think, especially in moments like this when we're all concerned with survival, we have brains that do not, we don't think we're cared for by a bunch of other people, not in this space. We feel more isolated and alone. And so I feel like it's desperately important that in this space you let people know, because people in your life will experience unplanned pregnancy and might in this very season, that you're there for them. Shoot them a text, letter, etc.
Yeah.
Andy, I have a question for you about how we can really provide empowering support, but specifically about ourselves. So one of the things that you talk about is that being in that space, I think especially we see it with the urge to provide advice. I've seen it a lot. It's happened in my life when somebody's talking about something that's really isolating and a little bit of a traumatic experience. Something inside you will kind of be jostled a little bit, and you'll go into fix-it mode. Maybe it's that I'm just the guy, I don't know. But that's the mode I go into. I want to fix it, I want to provide advice. But I realize that there is something going on in me. There's a reason I'm not just okay sitting there with them and
Mm.
being with them in that moment. So I want to ask you this. What do we need to understand about ourselves to provide effective support to someone in a traumatic situation or someone who's especially isolated, to provide empowering
Mm.
support to them in that moment? What do we need to understand about ourselves?
That's a great question. We need to get to know our own story. We need to get to know our own triggers. We need to get to know where we carry shame in our story, where we carry a sense of resiliency in our story. Because here's the reality, you don't have to have the same exact story as someone else to empathize with their story. In fact, research by Harvard Business Review has actually shown that if our story matches up too closely to someone else's, empathy actually drops. And the reason for that is because we start to project upon the other person how we made it through. And we're like, oh, I lost a child too. So this is what you need to do with the loss of your child. And it can be a bonding experience, but if we're too closely associated with the loss or with the pain, and we haven't dealt with our own pain, we will project on someone else what we think they should do, and we'll be judgmental when they don't do that. So if you have a similar story to someone, enter in, take a couple breaths, and try not to transpose your story on theirs. Let their story be unique and their way of doing it unique. Offer them some helpful tools and tactics and support if they ask for that. Now, if you don't have a story, like many of us don't have stories of unplanned pregnancy, so how do we enter in empathically? Well, you need to find some place inside of yourself that you have experienced fear or um, anger or loss or worry or anxiety. Just find some place inside of you that you felt vulnerable. And if we're really honest, we have multiple moments where we felt vulnerable. And if you can tap into that, you can tap into someone else's pain, someone else's fear, someone else's vulnerability, someone else's joy. Um, so I think the best thing to do is to get to know our story and really sit with those spaces where we felt vulnerable, to get comfortable with our story so that we can get comfortable with someone else's. Because when trauma is present inside of me, Josiah, if you start telling me your story and I haven't dealt with something in my story and it starts to aggravate that, it starts to rub on that, I will actually push you away because I don't want to have to feel my pain. So if we're not comfortable with our pain, we won't be able to sit with others. So do your work. See a therapist, see a coach, get to know your story, be part of a community that shares your story, have people be empathic towards your pain. That's the best way for you to be empathic towards other people's pain. You got to go first. You can't just learn tools and techniques on how to sit and listen. You have to have people sit and listen to you first.
Well, that's convicting.
So it's so much harder. Because here's the thing about therapists in general, not in general, some therapists. You know why therapists get into therapy is so that they can avoid their pain and help other people's pain.
Mm.
Because no one in therapy asks me, Andy, how are you doing? What's going on inside of you? I'm always there for someone else. And that's where a lot of leaders get stuck, is they're always taking care of people. Be cautious of those who are always taking care of people, because sometimes they take care of others because they don't know how to let people take care of them. And that is not a good cocktail. That's going to lead to judgment. That's going to lead to burnout. So we have to really let people see us and know us and have empathy towards us in our story. And that will allow us to sit with other people. We got to go first. It's hard.
I think that's incredibly challenging. Here's my gut instincts. I don't know this for sure, but as we've been doing this over the years, and so many people from across the country have committed themselves to standing by her, to being someone who's an advocate for the people in their lives, to being someone who won't basically will create vulnerable spaces in their life so that when someone or one of their friends faces these situations, they know they can come to them and they can trust them. We have a movement of people who err much further on the end of prioritizing and always being there for other people. And I think it's an incredible gift, and it's a wonderful strength of our movement, and it's something that's growing across the country. I think you point out something really important, though, and that's that for all of those people, it's very important that we take the lead on that
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you for this, as someone who certainly errs on, I'd rather deal with the pain of other people than the pain inside myself. What's one way you think we can sort of shift, or rather, one step we can take to begin walking in the other direction today?
I think philosophically, it's to realize that that's how we're built. And when we're not living that out, we're not being fully human. So, what's the first thing that a baby does when a baby is born besides cry? They breathe in. They take in their first breath, which actually allows them to be able to cry. We have to have oxygen come in order for us to create sound coming out. So they take a breath in, and what's the last thing we do when we die? We breathe that breath back out. That every point in between birth and death is a process of receiving and giving. That's literally how our body is built. If you think about most systems in the human body, they take in and then they push out. Okay, blood, your heart. Deoxygenated blood comes in, it oxygenates it, it sends it out to the body. It's just this process of how humans are built, that we receive and we give. And if we just stay stuck on one of those, we're going to get really lost. So part of it is to recognize as a human, um, it's not wrong or it's not shameful to think that we need something. It's actually what is most human. And then we need to do the work to recognize, how do we need people? Um, when did we need people in our past that they did not show up for? So, as a child, myself as a child, for others as a child, for you as a child, asking the question, what were the moments when I needed someone to step in and they didn't? Um, because abuse is about getting something that we didn't want. So we get something that wounds us. Neglect is about we needed something, we wanted something, and we didn't get it. And that leaves a void inside of us. So there's abuse that leaves a wound, and neglect, which leaves a void. And both, we have to face those if we're going to be able to sit with other people in their abuse and their neglect and in their pain. So really, I think the best first step is talk to people about your story. The thing that I first did in my story is I created a timeline and I put all the positive events above the line and all the kind of negative, painful events below the line. And for each event, the thickness of the line of that event was the intensity that I felt about it. Okay, so maybe being bullied or, a divorce that's happened, maybe that's a really thick line for someone. So positive above the line, negative below the line, and then the thickness of the line of those events is the intensity that you feel about them. That's a good way to just get to know your story and then share it.
I want to encourage you to take that as a challenge. If you are somebody who is really, you're part of this movement, you're there for other people, but you have not really walked through your own story, I want to encourage you to do that, because that is what's going to make you exponentially more there in ways that people can recognize, in ways that people see you're not holding back and that you are fully there for other people. That's what's going to make you able to do that. Andy, I think that's incredibly challenging and enlightening at the same time.
And honestly, I would go a step further, just say and say it's really not fair for you to ask someone else to open up and be vulnerable with you if you haven't opened up and allowed others to be vulnerable with you. Like, it's just not fair.
Yeah.
We can't take someone where we ourselves haven't gone. That's just the reality of human development and growth. And it's not fair to ask people to enter into a space of vulnerability unless you're in the ring too. So let that be a place of conviction and a place of encouragement that you actually, those listening, if you haven't taken good care of yourself, if you haven't let people in, I just want to encourage you, not as shame, but as encouragement, that you deserve to be known. You deserve to be known, and you deserve to be loved in the places where you feel the most shame or the most fear. I want the helpers to be loved as much as they're loving the people they're helping.
Wow. What an incredible vision, and how vital is it to do that in this moment in our world.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, this has been amazing. There's one other question that Michael asked, and Michael, I want to make sure I get this right in the chat, and that's that. Um, Basically, what's the best way? Are there strategic ways to connect with people that we don't know that well yet? So think of, like, I think a lot of people in our movement are relationship builders. In other words, they're expanding that the community that they have around themselves, and the number of people they are community to. That's part of what it
Mm-hmm.
means to be a first friend, and to be all about this.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to, the normal modes of building a relationship and actually caring for someone in a meaningful way that you don't know that well have been taken away. I'll be honest. I think most people, sad to say, who are facing unplanned pregnancy or a situation like it today, they aren't necessarily likely to want to go to someone they know really well. Now, we're trying to change that, but before it's changed fully, one thing that we recognize is there will be people coming to us who don't know us that well if we're able to create that space. Without the ability to connect in person, do you have any advice for how we connect with someone who's really going through something and build that relationship without the normal means accessible to us?
Be available and be consistent. Let them know that you will text them back. They can email you, they can call you, and then you better follow up with that. So be available and be consistent. Show them that you are a safe person because you're able to take their need in. And when they ask for something, you're able to respond back. Now, all of us get busy and things like that, but I think that's really important, is be consistent in what you say you're going to do, follow through, because that helps people feel safe. Um, I, these questions are so hard for me right now, Josiah, because there isn't a whole lot of strategies around what we already have. It's just a time of social grief, and we need to utilize what we have, like we've been talking about. But really, because we can't connect in some ways, it's really a season where we just have to enter into grief of losing what we had and waiting until we can have that back. It's not normal, it's not natural, it's not healthy. So we're really waiting to come back to the connection that we're built for. And in the meantime, I think, like what you said, is letter writing, letting people know you're available and consistent. Those are all really helpful things. I feel so lost in being able to offer advice in that area right now.
Even so, I think you did, and I think that's really helpful. Be consistent, be available. Andy, this is this is a conversation I'm going to come back to, I think, a lot during all of this. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And you have a TED Talk that's coming out really soon, which we will help.
I got it in before the pandemic. I got to do it.
You did, and I was there in person. It was phenomenal, and I think really, really paradigm shifting for every leader that was in that room. Voices family, we're going to share that with you as soon as it comes out, so that you can see it. Andy, if someone wants to follow you, or maybe has a follow-up question directly for you during the season, what's a good way to get in touch or track what you're doing?
People can email me at Andy Maurer, that's Maurer, at Andy@andymaurer.com. Or you can follow me on Instagram at @AndyMaurer_. So those are two ways. Send me an Instagram message or send me an email. I'd love to connect that way.
Yeah. Voices family, I want to summarize a couple things, and then we'll let Andy go. During this time, be available and make space for the people in your life. You don't know what they're facing. If they're facing unplanned pregnancy, they're probably not going to reach out to you unless they know you're available. So make sure the people in your life know you're available. Once we launch this Mother's Day card campaign, which you will be able to, so we'll be selling these cards, you can buy them. The proceeds will go to fund scholarships and relief efforts for moms who are in college and single moms who really need the support during this time. So we're really excited about that. Stay tuned for that for a couple weeks. In the meantime, if you are someone who can provide childcare or someone in your circle can, let us know. If you're someone who can run errands or someone in your circle can, let us know. This is a time where it's never been so dark, and it's never been so like we can shine our light and our community can be more meaningful to people than it's really ever been in history. And this is a moment of incredible opportunity for that. So for your reference, we're going to post a recording of this because I have a feeling people will want to come back to this discussion. So if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, we'll post it there. You'll get to reference that. Andy, this has been an incredible time. Thank you so much.
It's been really fun. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for
asked such good questions. It works well.
Yes. Well, your answers were incredible, and I think paradigm shifting to help us know how we can stand by her during the midst of all of this isolation. So stay healthy, everybody. Deal with your own story. Right, Andy? And yeah. Andy, thanks so much.
You bet. We're all in it together.
Yeah. All right, Voices family. Have a great day. Stay healthy, and stay tuned for more AMAs coming up each week as we go throughout this time, however long it lasts. We'll be in touch. Thanks.